the chief medical information officer, CMIO, needs to be part of that instant response, plain and simple. Because when something's happening and they can't get to a patient's data, the last thing we need to do is have 45 people running down into IT, screaming the sky is falling, going, "Oh my God, what are you doing? What are you doing?" Leave them alone, right?
Today, our guest is Rick Leib, CISO, Field CISO, excuse me there, Rick, Field CISO for Access Point Consulting. Rick's been in the business for 30 years, as in actually 30 years, that's 3 decades. He's one of the rare individuals who've been in the trenches and been talking to boards and been an executive across many industries and companies. We're great to have you here, Rick. Really appreciate your time. Looking forward to hearing more of your thoughts on cybersecurity and in particular healthcare and those impacts and strategies.
Thank you, Jeff. I appreciate it. Glad to be here.
Absolutely. We're glad to have you. As you know, there's so many different areas we can cover in cybersecurity, especially in healthcare, whether it's IoT, manufacturing, patient data, all those areas. How CIOs address cybersecurity, how CISOs address cybersecurity, if organizations, health organizations have CISOs to begin with, which always seems to be a struggling area for them. So really, let's start this off by this question to you. What should healthcare organizations stop doing?
What should they stop doing? Well,
Yep.
2 things come to mind just right away, immediately at the top of my head. The 2 things that they should stop doing, first off, stop relying solely on perimeter security, right? So they've invested a lot of money, a lot of time into firewalls, into firewall software and intrusion detection systems. Absolutely, don't stop doing that, but stop relying on that as your only entrance point. The networks used to be this hard, crunchy shell, on the outside where nothing could get through. And
M&M
then
security.
Yeah, and then all of a sudden they came along with Hotmail, and suddenly that hard, crunchy shell, they walked right through it. And that, unfortunately, that still happens today. Gmail, Hotmail, and I'm not picking on the providers, but literally everything goes into the user now at this point. They bypass the firewall in a lot of cases where it cannot be seen. A lot of encrypted traffic cannot be read. Some can, some cannot. And things go right past the firewall. So stop relying on your firewall as your only major point of interaction with a potential bad actor, right? That's what we don't want to be, right? The second thing that comes to mind, especially with healthcare, and I don't understand why, and maybe somebody can someday explain this to me, because this would be fantastic. Healthcare is the most targeted industry out there in the United States today. It is absolutely the biggest target out there because it has so much different type of data, so many different access points, endpoints that can be utilized by bad actors to make money. Plain and simple. They do it to make money, right? So stop hiring an engineer to be your CISO. Engineers are great. We love engineers. We really do. I came up through the engineering path myself, so I can tell you I understand. However, great engineers are great engineers. But most great engineers don't make good executives. And the problem in healthcare is being able to sell security, right? Honestly, it's really what it is. It's about selling it to the board, about selling it to the senior executive staff, understanding, what their threat really looks like, understanding what that takes to overcome those threats, and understand what it takes to invest in the infrastructure over the long term, right? So those are the 2 biggest mistakes I see made in healthcare right today, is probably just relying on your firewall for everything, or mirroring off the port, running your IDS on that, and hiring engineers to be your CISO. Those are the 2 biggest mistakes I see. There's a lot of other things out there we could do better, but those are 2 of the biggest mistakes I've seen out there lately.
So how have you addressed really the legacy system? So if you were sitting with a CIO or a chief administrator of a hospital or whomever is responsible for the IT infrastructure, how have you addressed, like, one of the key areas for hospitals is obviously their infrastructure, how they run their IT shop, any legacy systems that are clearly dependent upon, healthcare operations, but there are legacy systems and there's a whole set of vulnerabilities that come with it. How have you addressed that particular issue?
So that particular issue, I agree with you 100%. There's a lot of legacy systems out there that they cannot upgrade. They need to, but they can't, right? Because it's a cost. It's cost prohibitive. Right, wrong, or indifferent. Hospitals, healthcare systems are in business to make money. They want to help us. They want to make sure we all survive. We all have the great best possible healthcare. But in the end, they've got to make money, or they have no money to spend on things, right? And
Mm-hmm.
security needs to understand you're not a profit center. We are definitely an expense, plain and simple. But how do we solve some of these issues on the legacy systems? Is by taking a zero trust approach, right? Zero trust is a new fancy word for least privilege, which we've been talking about for 30 plus years, right? It's least privilege. I don't trust the machine. I don't trust the account. I don't trust the service. But microsegmentation actually helps. So if you break your network up in a lot of little pieces, try to cross over all those little pieces to get into that super sensitive area that's not as well protected because it can't be. That's difficult to get through that many different layers. So taking a microsegmentation approach to it, a zero trust approach to it, really makes the most sense. I mean, you've got your medical devices off on their own wireless signal. They've got their own wireless, carrier. They're off on their own. However, a lot of organizations still flatten their network to make things quicker and easier. Understanding the quick and easy needs to be there. However, security and safety have to be there as well, because security is a patient safety issue, plain and simple.
Yeah, that's a good point. I think, getting back to your microsegmentation comment, that is definitely something that, right. And I've worked within the healthcare space a little bit, certainly not as much as you have. But one thing that I think hits for me is that solution, or that idea, or that approach that, since you don't have a lot of money to spend on implementing zero trust architecture or buying more tools to run your security, the old fashioned, the old school, if you will, microsegmentation approach, as a bad guy, makes it harder for me to hop through different. It's easier if it's M&M security. I get in once and I can go all over the place. But if you do a microsegmentation, I've got to hop out of one and go to another, which makes me more visible to the network. What's that activity? Why is this person hopping from network to network? What's the deal, right? And there's risk that comes with it too, I think, right? Being able to, bad guys being able to do that, they'll have access to more data and tie pieces together. But from a defender's perspective, I think that also makes the bad guy more visible, right? Would you agree?
Absolutely. It does. Yeah. Absolutely. I mean, because a lot of the bad guys now, let's just be honest, are coming in and they're kind of living off the land, so to speak. So they're coming in, they're using common controls, they're using common commands to kind of hide themselves. So they look like another administrator on the network, or they look like another power user on the network, or, what have you. They just look like it's normal traffic, right? And that's what they're trying to do. However, if you make that difficult to go from, say, the point of ingress, which would be your firewall off the internet, and by the time you hit to the pharmacy and get into the Sentinel programs in the pharmacy, which are your security programs in the pharmacy, now you've been through 6 different firewalls. Right. That's really, really hard to do. Right. That's not easy, right? It's easier to attack a human being and get them to, to get them to open up an email and launch an application. Now you're inside, but you're still inside that one piece. Having to hop out into 5 or 6 different networks is difficult. So that's why I say go back to the old mentality of microsegmentation. It just works, and it doesn't cost much. It really doesn't.
Yep. Agreed. So as organizations or healthcare organizations don't have a lot of, as you pointed out earlier, investment to build out IT infrastructure or security infrastructure, they obviously rely on third parties quite a bit. What's been your experience or best practice around how a hospital should or should not engage third-party providers of any kind?
First off, you should have a third-party risk management system, plain and simple. You need to look at your vendors, make sure that they're HIPAA compliant, make sure they're high-tech compliant, make sure that they're following the best practices. If they get breached, you're breached, plain and simple. And you have to have that mentality when you look at these third-party vendors. Now, I'm a third-party vendor, right? So they have to look at me the same way, I've got to go through the same process anyone else needs to go through. Let's make sure that they're not on the do not use list, right? Let's make sure they're not a known bad actor, things like this. Let's make sure that their SOC 2 is current. Make sure that, their employees are trained, plain and simple, because security training, as much as we all like to laugh about it and everybody hates security training, it works. It just does work, and emphasizing that within their third party realm, making sure that happens is critical today. It really is. So going through a full third-party risk management system is absolutely critical.
What would you add into that? What does that look like for you?
What does that look like? So I would hire a third party to actually do the third-party risk management, right? So I would bring in an organization that can go through the the vendors, understand all of their resilience, understand their security, understand, where they've been, what they've done, or their incidents that they've had in the past. How do they overcome those incidents? What is their security stance? Their forward-facing security stance. How do they deal with their third parties, right? Because a fourth party is just as dangerous as a third party. It's actually, in my opinion, more dangerous because I don't know who my fourth parties are in some cases.
Agreed. And
So
that adds that additional level of risk, or that additional risk of
absolutely.
not understanding what the dependencies are from your third party, and what they have to get done. Right. Agreed. We've both seen breaches where that's happened, and the CIO and the board of directors and the CISO are clueless as to that impact, because it's just not something that you think about. Right. I mean, we have firewalls, we're good, right? And people don't think of that full process. So yeah. Agreed. Interesting. And I agree very much. The neglecting of employee training has definitely been a challenge for a lot of organizations. But it's like the easiest thing to do, and it's your frontline defense, honestly. And people still, don't change their passwords. It's still 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. So I mean, that's an inherent daily regular risk that
Yep.
organizations need to address. So
I run into
agreed.
this where senior executives don't take the training. They refuse to. And it's like, really? Guys, it's going to take 5 minutes of your time. I understand that your time is very valuable. I understand that what you're doing is great things for the organization and for your community. But if you're breached because you failed to take a simple class and you missed something simple, which quite frankly happens more often than we care to admit, that should have been that was overlooked, and just should be something so basic, right? There's so many times when just the basics are skipped and missed, and this is one of them, right? And I don't want to pick on any particular vertical or any particular head count or billet anywhere, but senior executives seem to be the ones that skip it the most, and unfortunately, they're the biggest targets in a lot of cases.
Exactly.
Right?
Exactly. Agreed. If, it makes better sense for bad guys to attack senior executives or their administrators, their admins, their support staff, versus the CISO or the CIO.
Yeah.
Just
I've
because of
actually
that.
had this scenario pop up where we had our CFO, and I'm not going to say who or what, but we had a CFO, not ours, but we had a CFO where I used to work, and would not take the training, just refused, just didn't have time. She didn't feel the need, didn't feel the requirement, didn't think that it was going to help her and her team any, so she just skipped it. Well, one day she got an email from the CEO of this organization, of this healthcare organization, said, "Hey, transfer money here and transfer money there. I'm busy. Just get it done. We need it now." And she did it. So she logged in quickly because it was the CEO. So she logged in quickly, initiated 2 transfers that were over $170,000. And then she logged back out, logged back in, and completed the transfers, violating segregation of duties in her own team.
Oh,
That money was gone right now. It was just gone.
wow.
When we went and found out that this had happened, and we went back, started looking at logs, we're like, why did you do these things? Well, these are simple basics. Well, you should have seen, recognized the CEO is never going to send you an email and ask for $170,000. Come on. That's basics, right? That's the first thing. Second thing, he would never ask you to transfer to Bank of America because we don't use Bank of America. We use this other bank, right? So a lot of these things were just flat out missed. The simple stuff, separation of duties. She didn't take that training, and she just didn't. She says she didn't realize she wasn't supposed to do that, even though her staff are required to do that. So it kind of goes along that line, right? So, and that's just one scenario. We eventually got $90,000 back, but we lost the rest of it. So we were lucky that we got 90 grand back.
No kidding.
We were lucky, but we lost over 80,000 in that. Yeah. And I got news for the world. The FBI doesn't care if you lose $90,000. Secret Service starts stepping in at 7 and 8 figures. Until then,
Yeah,
you're
right.
kind of SOL, right? I mean,
Exactly.
you're on your
Exactly.
own.
So how would you recommend, or how have you seen organizations manage medical devices? Right, because you always hear the wireless stuff's coming, the insulin pump that was hacked at Black Hat, 10 years ago, and then it's just been growing since then, right? The proliferation of those cool devices and what that means. What have you seen, or examples you've had, or what recommendations can you make around helping people think about that in a secure way?
So the first thing I try to tell people is your medical device team, you've got a technical team that keeps these devices up to date, right? They all come with an SBOM, which is a software bill of materials. So you know what's on the device. The newer ones do. There's a lot of old legacy systems still out there running on Windows XP on an infusion pump, and it's reality. So what I recommend they try to do is still go back to the basics, microsegmentation, get them on their own network, get, all of your devices that are easily attacked, you should hide those, right? Take a data-centric approach to your information security program, right? Know where is your data? What is most sensitive? What is the easiest thing? What is the easiest way to violate my network, right? What is the easiest way to violate my data, right? Take that data-centric approach to understanding your network and your security and your data, and apply that knowledge then to your most secure data where it needs to be the most secure, your healthcare, your EPHI, your devices that are easily compromised, and hide those. And how you hide those, because you still need to use them. You can't really hide them, right? It's hard to hide an MRI machine that's easily compromised, right? They're a pretty big device, right? So hide them by putting them back behind multiple firewalls, behind multiple firewall rule sets. Make them more difficult to get into. Make sure that your users that log into them aren't logging in on the flat network. They've got to make an extra step to get to this through MFA. You've got different techniques that can be used, and use them.
Yep. I remember, this was 8 years ago, 2024. Yeah, 8 years ago, 2016. And it was a hospital in Chicago. I don't remember the name of it. That might be a good thing. Where they discovered that one of their MRI machines actually had malware on it. Further investigation indicated that it was malware that was just had privileged access to every MRI that was done. The data would flow back into the database after the MRI was taken, and that malware would take a snapshot of it. So I know the FBI got involved, and I don't know what the results were. I don't know if it was a nation state or what, but I was just surprised that to go that far to somehow get malware on an MRI machine. Holy cow! What are you're taking all that data? I mean, what are you going to do with people's MRI? I mean, obviously there's a lot of IP there and personal information, but I was really surprised that somebody had the nerve to do that.
Well, it gives you a couple things, right? So, it proves the legacy equipment is still out there and it's easy to get into, right? That's A. And it's using an elevated account to do things.
Same thing.
So now they've got access to data, right?
Yep.
And 3, now, if I take that data from you, for example, and when I've seen less happen quite often, so I'm going to go in and I'm going to take your data. I'm going to steal your data, right? Well, whether I encrypt your data or not doesn't matter. But if I steal your data, I'm going to demand a ransom because you want your data back, or you don't want me to know. We don't want people to know that I've got your data, right? So what I've seen a lot of times is malware goes in and encrypts things, or steals things and encrypts things. They pay a ransom to get the encryption key, which my first advice is you're dealing with a criminal. Can you trust them, right?
Right.
So you're going to give $10 million or $100 million. Are they really going to give you the right key? Right. And then if they do give you the right key, what are they going to do with that data they still have? A lot of times I see them coming right back around to the hospital system and saying, you know what, if you don't pay us another ransom, we're going to expose the fact that we still have your data, that you were compromised. You paid us. Okay, so now you've hidden your compromise from the general public, typically speaking. You still have to file, there's still some regulatory documents that have to happen. But the public embarrassment is usually not as great because the public doesn't know, right? Now, when you start ransoming off that data again, now they're coming back to siphon off you a second time. So if you can avoid all of that to begin with, that's the best scenario, right?
Yeah, right, of course.
And that's by isolating off that MRI machine that's vulnerable, because you've taken that data-centric approach to it. You understand where your vulnerabilities are. You do your vulnerability risk assessments. You're not going for just strictly the compliance checkbox, right? Remember, compliance is not security. It's not. The compliance department and the security department are separate inside the company for a reason, and we should never look at them as the same either. If we hit the checkbox, we're good. We're safe and secure. It's not really how it works.
Yep. Agreed. Huh. And that was going to be, you kind of covered that a little bit on ransomware. I was curious what your thoughts and experiences were with ransomware. I mean, as a solution, right, you can go out and search the internet and find all these companies that say, we've got your ransomware solution. Just do these 5 things, or just buy this product, or whatever. And some of that is, good-natured, I think. Certainly, people want to help. But it might not have been very well thought through as far as the solution goes. So you have a lot of executives who are buying things that may or may not work for ransomware, thinking that if I buy this and install it, ready to go. So what are your thoughts on that?
That goes back to educating your executive staff, right? You've got to educate them on a secure budget, a budget that actually works well. But you have to understand what you're asking for with your executives, right? You've got to teach them what security is. You've got to sell security to them. So going back, they just look at, well, I've got BitLocker on my machine. So therefore I'm safe. I can never be encrypted because I've already encrypted my stuff. That's not necessarily the truth because they don't understand, right? So having the ability to educate those executives is critical, right? And what do I tell them when they go out and buy a product that's going to cure everything? I'm just going to ask them, okay, doc, when's the last time you took an aspirin to cure, hepatitis, right? Yeah, it just doesn't work that way.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
I've
Yeah.
actually asked a neurologist that question.
Yeah.
Have you took an aspirin? Did it cure hepatitis? They're like, no, it doesn't work that way. I said, right. Security doesn't work that way either.
Right. Right. Right.
You start putting in that
That
term, you
actually
understand it.
that actually raises another question. So I mean, when physicians in healthcare, right, they're used to dealing with symptoms, right? So once something happens, what do you go do? Versus how do you proactively do something to avoid the problem altogether? And in security, there's the defensive approach that we've talked about before, right? It's just kind of prolific across the industry. Everybody's playing defense, which is fine and great. We need to, but I think some organizations get lost in that. The ability to play not offense, but be proactive in your security operations, I think is the key thing, especially for, as you pointed out earlier, healthcare organizations where there's a lack of security mindset, if you will.
Absolutely. And this is where I really stress hard to healthcare organizations. This is where your risk assessments come into play, right? Risk assessments are not easy. Let's just be honest. In order to do a true risk assessment of an organization, I need to understand the data centric approach to your organization. Well, what data do we have? Where is it? What people do we have? What processes do we have? What assets do we own? And then I need to understand all the things that can go wrong, right? Or I need to ask the questions, what happens if, what if, what if, what if? And out of those what ifs, we start developing an incident response plan if we're doing it the correct way, right? And so a lot of people don't have that security centric mindset to where they go through their risk assessments, they try to hit a checkbox in compliance, right? Okay, well, we've done one. My question is, did you actually do it? And do it well, and did you think about it, right? And then the second part of that risk assessment is that business continuity plan or that disaster recovery plan or incident response plan is,
Mhm.
have we involved the right people?
Right.
And this is common in any organization. It's not just healthcare, but healthcare seems to be hit harder than most. I don't know why, but the executives are not part of that incident response plan. The IT CIO will typically be there, but very few others. And the chief medical information officer, CMIO, needs to be part
Mhm.
of that incident response, plain and simple.
Yep.
Because when something's happening and they can't get to a patient's data, the last thing we need to do is have 45 people running down into IT, screaming the sky is falling, going, oh my God, what are you doing? What are you doing? Leave them alone, right? A well-rehearsed incident response plan is critical. And you can't get to there without that true risk assessment, which helps you, your business impact analysis, et cetera. It all goes back to that same mentality. Since they don't have it now, start with the basics, business impact analysis. What's going to happen if this goes away, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And then go down into your incident response plans. How do I respond when this happens? Who's involved? Who's going to do what, et cetera, and rehearse it.
Yeah. I was gonna say, yeah.
There's a
Like a
lot of
tabletop.
there's a lot of
Right.
companies out there that build an incident response plan and then they have no idea what to do when an incident hits, right? Great, you've got a response plan. It's great. Now, did you actually test that response plan? Because one of the things I do differently than some folks, and I don't know why, but an incident response
Because
plan,
you have 30 years experience.
maybe,
That's why.
maybe an incident response plan is written, right? And in my professional opinion, that incident response plan is written as a guideline, right? What do you do when stuff hits the fan, right? When I said to do tabletops, I won't allow staff to wing it, right? So let's break out the incident response plan. We'll come up with 3 or 4 different scenarios to go ahead and run through the incident response plan. Malware is always one of them. Hint, folks that hire me, you're going to get hit with a malware tabletop. Understand that's coming, right? And how we handle it. But I actually take out their incident response plan and say, okay, great. We're going to do these 15 things, right? And I'll listen to the team. Go ahead and I'll throw the scenarios at them and I'll play them through end to end. And I have yet to find a single incident response plan out there that's actually followed by IT. A lot of times they don't even know it. So incident response should be your mapping, right? And so I sit down and try to work with them and say, okay, here's your gap analysis. We ran through this test. Your incident response plan doesn't have anything to do with your servers being in the cloud. We should probably address that. There's a huge gap here. And so I try to actually sit them down and walk through it and understand. This is your plan because this is what you're telling the board of directors. This is what you're telling OCR. This is what you're telling your doctors is going to happen. This is what you're telling your patients is going to happen, right? And if you have no idea what that is, you can't follow it.
Right, right, right. Agreed. So we're kind of going into that second part of questions I had for you, which is what should healthcare organizations start doing? And I think that the tabletop, the IR, what other suggestions would you make regarding what health organizations should start doing this year?
So start doing this year. Honestly, I've seen a lot of different things that work great. But honestly, start reinvesting back into your information security program, right? There's been a trend to divest a little bit, and I'm not clear why, but I've seen some trending in healthcare to actually divest and actually start stepping away from their security because they throw their arms like, well, you know what? If the FBI can't stop China, I can't stop China. So we're just going to go ahead and go forth, right? Great thought pattern, wrong way to go about it, right? Because you still have fines, we still have reputational loss. So we need to start thinking about it, right? So what should we do? Engage a third party risk assessment. And the reason I say a third party is and then let me define why. The third party risk assessment is bringing somebody in. I don't care if they don't have an investment in your network or investment in your future. They do because they want you to pay them, which means they have an investment, right? But having a third party come in is a different set of eyeballs, right? So now you've got your IT staff, you've got your security staff, and please, folks, separate your IT staff from your security staff. They're not the same team. They should never be on the same team, reporting to the same structure. But once you have that third party come in and have that secondary set of eyeballs, they're going to see things you're going to miss, plain and simple. As a CISO, I can tell you I have missed things that were critical to the organization. I have done so because I had the same people look at the same thing every day, every week, every year, year over year. I had the same penetration testing company coming in. I don't do any of that anymore. Now we get a third party risk assessment. I change my pen testers around every year. I use 3 or 4 different pen testers because they use different tools. They use different techniques and technologies to find different things. So they always find different results, right? So if you're doing the same thing over and over, you're going to find the same thing over and over, right?
Right,
That's the definition of of idiocy, right? Or insanity,
Insanity,
So
close enough.
yeah, right. Let's do something a little bit different. So I recommend we get a third party risk assessment in. I always try to have our risk assessment or incident response plan ready and practice it over and over and over. Guys, don't practice it once a year. Practice it every quarter. Seriously, it will actually help you. It will help your help desk. It will help your end users. It'll help the nurses. It'll help your neurologists understand what's happening and what they can expect. That way, you're not flooding your help desk with 50,000 calls. Everybody knows what's happening. You're still going to get a lot of calls. We do that. Also, I would take more of a proactive stance, like you were talking about, Jeff. Honestly, just look at your information security program and start end to end. Start at your business impact analysis. Did you do one for every major system, right? And what does that mean? What does the business impact analysis mean? What does that come out of it? Have you built your disaster recovery for each system, right? What is your business recontinuity plan? How is the business going to continue to move during a disaster, right? Now, healthcare is very good. They got a HICS system, which is you've had healthcare in crisis, right? So you've had a school bus, unfortunately nailed by a semi. Now your emergency room is overrun. Your emergency department is overrun with patients, right? We actually have plans for this, and they practice this. There's no reason not to practice information security, disaster recovery and disaster preparedness. So that would be one of the couple things I would say that they've been doing right, and they need to do a little bit better, is continue investing, continue practicing.
I mean, who thinks of that type of disaster preparedness or crisis preparedness? Massive casualties. How is the hospital going to handle it? Or if they lose power, what are they going to do? When's the generator kick on? What has to happen? What's the priorities? Well, you should tie cybersecurity into that every time. What's the impact there? And then even going so far as you pointing out, a separate program, tabletop exercise on security. What are we going to do if? Because I think that would be a key thing certainly to have to address and to come up with. So, okay, that's interesting. Huh? What else should they start doing in 24?
Honestly, get serious about training your staff. You've got to get the basics, right? So the reality is we keep seeing malware incidents, we keep seeing compromises because we're missing the basics, and we keep doing it over and over and over. Now, I'm not saying every malware attack was because somebody missed a basic, but most of them are. We're not doing vulnerability management properly, right? So vulnerability management is critical to an organization. Not only am I going to do Windows patches once a month, we all know what that looks like, right? And it's ugly, and we all put it off to the weekends. And when the doctors aren't working, there's not as many patients. But you can't do that in the ED. You can't do that in the OR. You got to schedule things. But honestly, getting back to basics, what does your vulnerability management program look like?
Sure.
Are you
Sure.
just doing Windows updates? Are you updating the software bill of materials? Are you working with the FDA to understand the medical devices and what you can and cannot update? If you cannot update it, are we isolating it, right? But this is all critical stuff, right? A lot of people think about the Windows patch management, like I keep talking about, I keep referencing over and over and over. They forget routers, basic firmware.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Right?
Absolutely.
They forget firewall firmware sometimes, not always, but sometimes, right? Again, go back to the basics. Actually understand what's on your network, understand what you have, what can you and what can you not upgrade, right? Because let's just be honest, there are systems you cannot update. If you update them, you lose millions of dollars. They don't work, what have you, or it's outdated.
Right.
So we have to
that's a good
isolate
point.
those. But you don't know what to isolate if you're not managing your vulnerabilities. If you don't know where your vulnerabilities are, you can't manage them.
Right. So deep, in-depth vulnerability management assessment, essentially. So is that what you're saying?
Absolutely. Look at your hardware. Or do you have all the great latest BIOS on your servers? If you have internal servers, if you have cloud, look at your security in your cloud. What does that actually look like? Have you had a third-party assessment, et cetera?
Yeah. Yep. Okay. That's excellent. So I think, if I was to recap, so correct me if I'm wrong here. So reinvest in security training, right? Third-party risk assessment, information security program for the enterprise. So looking at your organization enterprise wide, and what's your security program look like today? Training the staff I covered, and then vulnerability assessments for hardware and software.
Those would be some of them. Yes, absolutely.
Yep. Okay.
And again, I go back to the very basic. You have to have executive buy-off.
Yep.
If you don't have the executives involved in your information security program, it will fail, plain and simple. You've got to get the backing of the executives.
Yep.
Absolutely critical. It starts with executive commitment and vision, plain and simple.
Okay. Cool. Well, anything else you'd like to add as we wrap up our time?
The other thing is, I would continue training your staff. You're not just your end users, but also your security staff. They need training, right? So a lot of companies seem to think, well, I'll throw more tools at this and that'll make things easier. Well, no, that doesn't make things easier. Trust me, that makes things very, very, very much more difficult, because now you've got a brand new tool in the organization that's already not secure, that already can't keep up. Understand where you're at. So this goes back to when we look at vulnerability management, or we look at alert management. So when you get if your firewall is throwing, or your incident response, or your intrusion detection system is throwing 800 alerts a week, your SIM's tossing 800 alerts a week, right? If you have the staff that can handle 100 alerts a week, you have two options. Because one, you got 800 alerts. You can either tune those alerts out, and now you're ignoring 700. Right. You can only handle 100, right? Or you can increase your staff and your training to start getting closer to that 800. But you can't get to that 800 if your board of directors doesn't realize that's where you're at. If your executive staff don't realize you have that many alerts and you need staff and budget and tools, that's how you get to them. That's how you start showing them, these are all the things we're dealing with. These are the 4 we can handle.
Right.
I either need to reduce this, or I need to increase this, one of the two.
Right. And I think that's a really good point, saying, hey, here's what we have, but risk-wise or alert-wise, and if we don't address those and something goes wrong, we're all responsible. As a CISO, I can only do so much, but we're all responsible. Go ahead.
Yep. And in our world, in the healthcare world, that's called willful neglect, which fines get really expensive for willful neglect.
That's a really good point. I didn't think of that.
Yeah.
That's a really good point to bring up, because that is definitely an issue that executives, not just now because of the SEC ruling, but certainly in healthcare, if you're neglecting that, if it looks like you're neglecting that and you knew, then there's going to be bigger challenges. So.
Yes. Much bigger challenges.
Interesting. Wow. Very cool.
And for those,
thanks. Go ahead, Rick. Yeah.
One last piece. For those that don't have a CISO in the executive staff, get one. Get a CISO on the executive staff.
Yeah, that's a good point, because I think as there's such a need for that level of expertise, but there's just not many people still in the industry today who don't have that background, but the need is certainly there, from boards of directors needing advice to a CEO just needing a second set of eyes or advice on an issue that they're dealing with, or a CISO part-time even on their staff, just to look at things, right?
That was my next step. That was going to be my next point. Get a vCISO, get a virtual
Yeah.
CISO or a CISO advisor of some sort, you
Yep.
know, to sit there and hold your hand and help you understand where are we really at? What do we need to do the next year to accomplish our business goals?
Yep. Agreed. I think that's really good advice, and certainly from your practiced experience background. So really appreciate it. Rick, thanks again for coming on board. I'm sure we're going to talk more again in the future on another topic. Absolutely. So thank you, everyone, for joining us today, whether you're a CEO charting a course or a CIO building defenses and building out your IT infrastructure, or you're a CISO in the middle of all of this. This is what we're here for. The State of Security podcast is to help you navigate what that is and what that looks like. Great guests like Rick and others in the future that'll help really provide proactive information that'll help you, the listener, be able to walk away from this podcast with something you can do. So we encourage you to subscribe now and help put the word out for this podcast. As we get more information and more audience, we'll be able to spread this information far and wide. So I appreciate everyone. Thanks a lot.